All right, talking about the bone recap or bone formation recap, and elaborating on the ideas that you guys talked about in the concept maps as well as your um, storyboards. So first, we're going to talk about the intramembranous bone, and thinking about how this bone forms is forming from the inside out. So in this first picture here, we see the osteoblasts um, all clumped up in the middle, making a little center, ossification center. That's the clump of osteoblasts there. And around it, we have mesenchymal cells, which are going to later become the peristeum on the outside of the bone. But these cells are able to differentiate and become um, other cells and be have multi purposes, um, and that helps with the formation of osteoblasts in other areas when we get to the endochondral bone formation. These help with the formation of the cartilage, but these will become the peristeum and the intramembranous bone formation. So again, in this ossification center, we have our osteoblasts, and their purpose is to create and secrete osteoids. Uh, and those osteoids will then, going to this picture, um, those osteoids will then be calcified through the process of calcification uh, and start to become the actual hard material of the bones. And that's possible thanks to the osteocytes. Uh, and so osteocytes do not divide. So how these cells get here, the osteoblasts, then as the ossification center expands, the osteoblasts are, some of them are able to switch into and turn into osteocytes. They're able to differentiate and change into osteocytes, and that's where they'll stay until they are broken down and recycled. And so these osteocytes are going to secrete calcium and help the osteoids form that actual tough bone. Down here, let me shrink this. That's as small as it goes. So let's do that. So in this picture, the third picture C, the mesenchymal cells are now starting to condense and form the peristeum, which is going to be that coating on the outside of the bone. Again, we're still growing from the inside out. This center point used to be where the ossification center was. As the mesenchymal cells are condensing, blood vessels have penetrated the area to provide blood to those osteocytes that will stay there to continue to keep that bone healthy. And then in the last picture, as the bone uh, is now being formed, the peristeum has now pretty much solidified to make that covering the spongy center where the osteocytes have secreted um, or has the blood vessels have been able to penetrate to make that marrow in that spongy bone. The On the outsides, the cells, thanks to the osteoblasts, have started to form the tough compact bone along the or on the outside or the edges of this structure. So you see in this picture we have the peristeum, which is covering um, the original osteoblasts, which are now osteoprogenitors, which allows it to um, convert into osteoblasts, osteocytes, or osteoclasts, depending on what this body signals to happen going forward. So if there is a need for more growth, it would signal for these cells to become osteoblasts. Uh, or if it's grown too much, it would signal for those to become osteoclasts and so forth. When talking about the endochondral bones, this is how we're think about adding from end to end, or adding on each end. So it starts off with the cartilage model, which is laid down by chondrocytes. And those chondrocytes have, again, differentiated from the mesenchymal cells. So all of this is possible because those mesenchymal cells have that ability to become multiple different types of cells, that multipotency, being able to have multiple functions, similar to like stem cells. So going from the cartilage model, thanks to the chondrocytes, the osteoblasts are able to start replacing that cartilage with spongy bone. And again, the mesenchymal cells are on the outside that will then become the periosteum, and that again is the protective covering of the cell or of the bone. So as the osteocytes begin replacing that cartilage, that ends up elongating the diaphysis, uh, and that is the elongation process takes place at the primary ossification site. So that's going to be located at the edges of the medullary cavity. Or medullary cavity, like that. In this picture D, we have the secondary ossification regions, ossification sites starting to form, and that's happening in the epiphysis region of the cells or of the bone. So that's going to be at the base and at the head of that long bone. The primary ossification site is still working. We're still making the spongy and compact bones along the diaphysis. So that is continuing to expand and elongate. And here we have the medullary cavity that becomes more prominent and more obvious. That will then be filled with that yellow marrow and the blood vessels. The last few pictures, so the bone will continue to elongate and grow until the epiphyseal disc or the growth plate is essentially fused between the compact and the, not compact, the diaphysis and the epiphysis. So when those two areas join and replace that cartilage region uh, on the disc or the growth plate, then you get a mature bone. Once that growth plate is gone, that bone will no longer grow. If you break your bone at the growth plate, it can stunt the growth in the bone. So if I cracked my lower knee as a younger child, that would slow down the growth or prevent the growth in my bone at that growth plate. And when we're talking about the remodeling of cell or remodeling of bones, I keep saying cells and I apologize. So the remodeling of bones, we're going to start here with the osteoclasts. So these osteoclasts are going to come in and break down the calcium and the calcification of those osteoids and break down the bone. These monocytes also, depending on where you look, they can be called phagocytes. They are going to absorb and reabsorb those the calcium that is released and clear out this little divot that is created by the osteoclasts. These pre-osteoblasts, or those osteoprogenitors that we talked about earlier in this little recap, those pre-osteoblasts then finish their transformation and become full-on osteoblasts, where they will secrete osteoids into this region, into the cleared out region by the osteoclasts. From there, some of these cells will differentiate and become osteocytes and take up space in this osteoid region, and the other ones will then become the osteocytes along the edge of the bone and essentially repair it and get it back to the way that it was from the original message. And all this process would begin by a chemical trigger or chemical signal telling your osteoclast to start breaking down and reabsorbing some of the calcium that's that your body is needing for whatever reason. So that's been the quick recap of bone formation, as far as intramembranous bone, the endochondral bone, as well as bone remodeling. These similar process we'll talk about when we get to fractures, and understanding how bones are remodeled will definitely help with how bones heal themselves after um, after suffering an injury that has broken the bone.